What would you do if you spent decades pouring your heart into a community, only to face its unraveling at the hands of prejudice and corruption? Imagine this. An elderly black woman, peacefully sitting on her own porch, suddenly finds herself the target of police harassment. The air is thick with tension when her son arrives unexpectedly, flipping the situation on its head. But what startling secret does he hold that leaves everyone speechless? And could it be the key to restoring justice in a neighborhood under siege? Let's set the scene. Picture a quiet summer afternoon in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama. The narrow street, lined with modest homes, had a certain charm. Though many of the houses were aging, their stories still lingered in the worn paint and creaking porches. Among them stood the home of 76-year-old Evelyn Carter, a house that wasn't the largest or most pristine, but it radiated life. Chipped siding and a weathered porch couldn't overshadow the beauty of her vibrant garden, bursting with colors that spoke of decades of care and devotion. Evelyn, with her silver hair and wise, deep brown eyes, sat in her usual spot on the porch. The old wooden rocking chair cradled her, as she sipped iced tea from a glass perched on a small table. Despite the heavy heat of the day, she appeared unbothered, her gaze quietly observing the world beyond her garden. She saw a neighborhood that had transformed, once a tight-knit community of black families who worked tirelessly to build their lives, now a patchwork of younger, white newcomers. The bonds that once united the street had dissolved, leaving behind an uneasy distance. On this particular afternoon, Evelyn noticed Rebecca, a newer neighbor, briskly walking by with her little dog. Rebecca's visits were familiar though brief, a polite nod here, a tight smile there. But something was different this time. Rebecca's hurried steps and nervous glances over her shoulder hinted at unease. Evelyn's chest tightened, a silent testament to years of sensing the subtle yet stinging discomfort others directed her way. They'll never know what it was like, she murmured to herself. Yet before she could dwell on the thought, the distant wail of sirens shattered the calm. 2 police cars raced down the street, screeching to a halt in front of Rebecca's home. Evelyn sat up, gripping the arms of her chair as officers emerged with determined strides. Rebecca, gesturing frantically, pointed toward Evelyn's house. The heat of the afternoon seemed to intensify as Evelyn watched the officers pivot in her direction. Their approach was slow and deliberate, like hunters closing in on their prey. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she remained seated resolute. This was her home, her sanctuary. She had faced too many battles to let fear strip away her dignity now. "Ma'am," the lead officer began, his tone clipped and suspicious, "we've had a report of suspicious activity. A resident claims they saw someone matching your description looking into windows." Evelyn blinked, momentarily stunned by the absurdity of the accusation. "I've been right here all afternoon," she replied, her voice steady despite the indignation bubbling beneath the surface. "Do you have proof of that?" the officer countered, his gaze narrowing. "Can anyone vouch for you?" The question hung in the air, as audacious as it was insulting. "Proof? To sit on her own porch?" Evelyn's voice firmed. "This is my home. I've lived here for 50 years. I don't need proof to sit in my own front yard." The lead officer's posture stiffened. "We're going to need you to come with us to answer a few questions," he said, stepping closer. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she refused to waver. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared quietly, her tone unwavering. "Not when I've done nothing wrong." Before the situation could escalate further, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drew everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Evelyn's son, Aaron Carter. At 47, Aaron was a commanding presence, a respected attorney with a reputation for blending calm resolve with razor-sharp intellect. "Is there a problem here?" Aaron asked, his tone measured but edged with authority. His presence alone shifted the power dynamic. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. "We're investigating a report of suspicious activity," the lead officer began, but Aaron cut him off with a raised hand. "There's nothing suspicious about a woman sitting on her porch," Aaron said, his words precise and unwavering. "Unless you have more than baseless accusations, I suggest you reconsider your approach." The tension was palpable. The officers faltered, retreating to their cars with muttered excuses. As they drove away, Evelyn turned to Aaron, her voice soft but firm. They'll be back. This isn't over. Aaron placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know, Mom, he said, his voice a quiet promise. But neither are we. The evening sun bathed the neighborhood in golden light as Aaron guided his mother inside. Though tired, Evelyn's resolve remained intact. This is my home, she said with quiet determination. And I'm not leaving. Aaron nodded, his admiration for her strength deepening. But as the phone rang moments later, his focus sharpened. The voice on the other end carried an unexpected weight. Meet me tomorrow, the officer said, his tone urgent. There's more to this story than you know. Aaron set the receiver down, the pit in his stomach growing. Whatever the officer knew, it was only the beginning of a battle far larger than they had anticipated. Evelyn's mind churned with unease, a storm brewing behind her usually calm demeanor. The whispers of a pattern, something dark and unspoken, unfolding in her neighborhood had struck a nerve, her lips pressing into a thin line as if to contain the weight of her thoughts. Patterns like these, she knew all too well, were never harmless. They carried the same ominous rhythm she'd seen before. Hushed accusations, subtle shifts, and then the inevitable. Families like hers pushed out, their lives uprooted under the guise of progress. You're going to meet him, aren't you? She asked, though the resolve in her son's eyes had already answered her question. Aaron nodded, his jaw tight with determination. I need to find out what's really going on. If this is happening to others, we can't just sit back and let it continue. Her heart swelled with equal parts pride and trepidation. Be careful, she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of years spent shielding her son from a world that often seemed stacked against them. Aaron offered a reassuring smile. I will, Mom. I promise. But that night, Evelyn couldn't shake the unease. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind awash with memories of battles past. She thought of the years she had spent fighting to carve out a life for herself and Aaron, the sacrifices, the setbacks, and the quiet triumphs that marked their journey. Now, as her son stepped into the fray, she felt the familiar pang of dread. This fight felt larger, more insidious, like a shadow creeping over their home. The next morning, Aaron rose early, the events of the previous day still fresh in his mind. He slipped out of the house silently, not wanting to disturb his mother, and made his way to the Southside Diner. The city was still cloaked in the soft hues of dawn, the streets mostly empty save for a few early risers. His thoughts raced as he drove, questions piling up like storm clouds. What had Officer Jackson meant by a pattern? And why the secrecy? At the diner, Aaron spotted Jackson seated in a corner booth, his face shadowed with fatigue, as he stared into a cup of coffee. Sliding into the seat across from him, Aaron waited. The officer didn't acknowledge him at first, as if bracing himself for the weight of what he was about to reveal. You came, Jackson finally said, his voice low and resigned. I came, Aaron replied, his tone steady but edged with impatience. You said you had something to tell me. So talk. Jackson's gaze darted around the diner before he leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There's been a string of incidents like what happened to your mother. Calls to the police about suspicious activity, all targeting Black residents. Aaron felt the air leave his lungs. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of anger coursing through him. Why hasn't anyone said anything? He demanded, his voice taut with restrained fury. People are scared, Jackson admitted, his expression grim. Those who've tried to speak out? Let's just say they've been silenced. Silenced? What does that mean? Aaron's frown deepened. Jackson leaned back, his face dark with unspoken truths. Fines. Arrests. Even threats. It's not just random. It's organized, developers, city officials, people with money and power. They want your mother and others like her out of that neighborhood. Aaron's fists clenched under the table. And you're telling me this now? Why should I trust you? Jackson's eyes softened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. Because it's wrong. I became a cop to protect people, not to push them out of their homes. I've seen enough. I can't stay silent anymore. Aaron studied him, searching for sincerity in the man's weary expression. The temptation to distrust burned strong, but Jackson's willingness to come forward couldn't be ignored. All right, Aaron said finally, his voice firm. What do we do next? First, we gather proof, Jackson replied. Then we fight back. The words lingered as Aaron drove home, his thoughts swirling with the enormity of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about his mother. It was a calculated effort to erase a community. But they wouldn't go quietly. They would fight together. Over the course of her life, Evelyn Carter had watched her neighborhood evolve, both in beauty and hardship. But nothing could prepare her for the storm that threatened to uproot everything she had worked for. Anonymous letters arrived in the mail, each one laced with venomous threats, urging her to abandon the lawsuit and leave. Then came the chilling escalation. Her beloved garden, once a sanctuary of blooming life, was ruthlessly trampled. Flowers she had nurtured with care were reduced to broken stems and wilted petals. Aaron was livid. He paced the living room, his anger spilling into every word. "This is exactly what they want," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and determination. "They want to scare us into giving up. But we can't let them win." Evelyn, shaken but resolute, met her son's fiery defiance with a quiet strength. "They can destroy my flowers," she said softly, her eyes steady, "but they can't destroy me. This isn't the first time I've faced hate, and it won't be the last." Yet as the days wore on, the pressure mounted, revealing a battle far greater than either of them had anticipated. One night, Aaron's phone rang, the sharp tone piercing through the heavy silence. He answered groggily, only to hear Officer Jackson's voice, low and urgent. "You need to be careful," Jackson warned, his tone laced with an ominous edge. "There are powerful people tied to this lawsuit, people who won't hesitate to act. You and your mother could be in danger." Aaron's heart pounded as he clutched the phone tighter. "What kind of danger?" he pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. Jackson hesitated. "The kind that doesn't play by the rules," he finally said. "Watch your back, Aaron." The words echoed long after the call ended. Aaron sat in the darkness, his thoughts racing with fear and fury. How could he tell his mother that their fight wasn't just for justice anymore? It was for survival. The next morning, he broke the news over coffee, the weight of it hanging between them like a storm cloud. "Mom," he began hesitantly, Jackson called. "He says we're being watched. These people, they're powerful, and they'll do anything to stop us." Evelyn listened intently, her calm exterior betraying none of the turmoil Aaron felt. "Aaron," she said after a long pause, her voice steady and unwavering, "I've been fighting people like this my whole life. This isn't the first time someone's tried to scare me, and it won't be the last. But I'm not afraid, and I'm not backing down." Despite her resolve, the threats became more frequent, more personal. One morning, Evelyn found a chilling message spray-painted across her front door, "Leave or else." But rather than cower, the sight of it steeled her resolve. She saw it not as a warning but as a reminder of every battle she had ever faced, and every victory she had earned. "Mom, this is getting dangerous," Aaron said later that day, inspecting the vandalism with a frown. "We need to consider moving, at least until things settle down." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Aaron," she replied firmly, "this is my home. I'm not running from cowards with spray cans. They want to scare me, but I won't give them that satisfaction." Aaron sighed, torn between admiration for his mother's courage and the gnawing fear in his gut. "Fine," he said at last, "but we need to take precautions. Cameras, alarms, whatever it takes. And if things get worse, promise me we'll reassess." Days turned into weeks as the trial loomed closer, each moment thick with tension. Evelyn became a beacon of strength for the community, standing at the forefront of protests and giving interviews that galvanized their resolve. Her unwavering presence inspired others, reminding them of the fight's deeper purpose: dignity, justice, and the right to stand one's ground. But the threats didn't stop. And when news broke of Officer Jackson's death, labeled an accident by authorities, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that it was no coincidence. The stakes had risen, and the fight had turned deadly. Yet Evelyn remained unyielding. As the courtroom doors opened on the first day of the trial, Evelyn walked in with her head held high. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for every family that had been displaced, every voice that had been silenced. With the weight of the community on her shoulders, she faced the defense's attempts to paint her as a troublemaker with quiet defiance. Each word she spoke a testament to her unbreakable spirit. When Evelyn finally took the stand, her voice carried the strength of generations. The defense attorney's questions were sharp, but she parried them with grace. Yes, the neighborhood had changed. Yes, she had lived through decades of hardship. But no, she wouldn't call gentrification progress. Not when it came at the expense of people's homes and lives. And as the courtroom hung on her every word, Evelyn Carter became more than just a plaintiff. She became a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, some battles are too important to abandon. And no threat, no intimidation, could ever make her forget that. The courtroom was tense, a space brimming with unspoken emotions, as Evelyn met the attorney's gaze with unwavering determination. Maybe for some people, those changes have been good, she said, her voice steady but edged with the weight of personal loss. But not for us. Not for the people who built this community. The attorney frowned, leaning forward as if trying to bridge the chasm between them. But isn't it true that the police were simply responding to calls from concerned neighbors? Isn't it possible they were just doing their job, trying to keep the neighborhood safe? Evelyn's eyes flashed, her calm voice laced with quiet fire. Safe? For who? She demanded, each word cutting through the courtroom's still air. Because it sure didn't feel safe when they stood on my porch, accusing me of crimes I didn't commit. It didn't feel safe when they harassed my neighbors for walking down the street. The only people they were protecting were the ones who wanted us gone. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But Evelyn remained composed, a pillar of strength amidst the storm. The attorney, visibly rattled, pressed on despite losing ground. So, you believe the police were deliberately targeting you and your neighbors? Evelyn nodded firmly. I don't just believe it, I know it. And I know why. They wanted us out. They wanted this neighborhood for themselves, for the developers, for the people with money. But we fought back. And we'll keep fighting until we get the justice we deserve. Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. The courtroom fell silent, the tension palpable. Even the attorney struggled to find his next argument, his confidence visibly shaken. The judge finally broke the silence, his tone respectful. Mrs. Carter, he said, clearing his throat, please continue. What do you believe is at the heart of this matter? Evelyn drew in a deep breath, her gaze locking onto the judge's. Respect, she began, her voice steady, though laden with the echoes of years of struggle. Or rather, the lack of it. They don't respect us, not me, not my neighbors. They see us as obstacles, as inconveniences in their plans to build something shiny and new. But we're not obstacles, we're people. We've lived here for decades, raised our families here, worked hard to make this community what it is. And now they're trying to erase us, to push us out like we were never here. Her voice, calm but resolute, carried the weight of generations who had weathered countless storms. But we were here. We are here. And we're not leaving. Not because they want us gone. Not because they've decided we don't belong. This is our home. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, captivated by her words. Even the defense attorney faltered, forcing a smile that did little to mask his discomfort. Mrs. Carter, he began, his voice strained. No one is saying you don't belong. But isn't it possible that some of these concerns, these calls to the police, were genuine? That perhaps some of the newer residents were simply unfamiliar with their surroundings? Evelyn's lips thinned into a tight smile, her composure unshaken. Unfamiliar, she echoed, her tone razor-sharp. That's what they call it. Let me tell you something. There's a difference between being unfamiliar and being afraid. What they felt wasn't unfamiliarity. It was fear. Fear of us. Fear of people who don't look like them, who don't live like them. But that fear doesn't give them the right to call the police on their neighbors, or to use it as an excuse to push us out. The defense attorney opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the judge's firm yet kind voice interjected. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. You may step down. Evelyn rose, her head held high, and walked back to her seat. As she passed, Aaron felt a surge of pride well up within him. His mother wasn't just his anchor. Today, she was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience for their entire community. The trial continued for another grueling week, each side presenting its case with growing intensity. Reporters swarmed the courthouse daily, their cameras and questions amplifying the tension. Through it all, the residents stood united, a formidable front against the forces seeking to dismantle their lives. Aaron spent every waking moment preparing, poring over strategies late into the night with their attorney. The weight of the fight pressed down on him, but he refused to break. There was too much at stake. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the judge took his seat, his expression grave. Evelyn sat beside Aaron, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent reminder of their shared strength. This case, the judge began, his voice measured, touches on issues far deeper than property rights or police conduct. It speaks to fairness, equality, and the essence of community. Aaron's heart pounded as the judge's words sank in. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiffs, the judge declared. The actions taken against them were unlawful, and those responsible will be held accountable. Cheers erupted, mingled with gasps of disbelief. Evelyn leaned toward Aaron, her voice trembling with emotion. We did it, she whispered. Aaron turned to her, a triumphant smile breaking across his face. Yeah, Mom. We did.